To say that I don't like slam is to probably dismiss all of the incredible poets that have actually sort of flown from the slam scene. But I will say that slam poetry was established in the same year of the Gulf War. And every war has given rise to poets who would rail against it. In the 1960s, there's a great example. Adrian Mitchell read a poem about Vietnam at the Albert Hall. I think slam poetry came into the house of poetry and rearranged the priorities of what poetry is. Rearrange the priorities. And let me just give you an example of what the priorities are in poetry and what slam poetry said the priorities are. Let me also give you an example of how to build an ivory tower by blaming other people's ivory towers. So it's this. First, the root of poetry is in the poet's belief in poetry, and belief in their poetry, and belief in their creative spirit. From that root, you grow a sense of critique, but the critique can only grow with care and attention. You know, you don't just throw a plant in the ground and go, right, grow, and if you're bad, forget you. So that's a really tender process of which the writer has to sort of harden. You have to go out in all weathers, you know, to tend this beautiful thing, the poem and the creativity, and you have to allow it to grow in the way it'll grow. Some arms will grow radical, some arms will grow inside, some, you know, branches, you know, will grow up to the light, some of them will go down to the roots, whatever. Let it grow and tend to it. What slam poetry did was said, okay, stand in front of an audience, and if they tell you that you're good, then you're good. But if they tell you you're not, you're not. That's like everybody standing around a plant and saying, this is not a good plant, this is a weed. Let's take this weed out so that a good plant can grow. And the nature of neoliberalism is that is that the market forces become more important almost than the product. So what slam poetry did is said the true value of your worth, plant, is not in the miraculous uniqueness of what you're doing. It's in whether they tell you that you're good or not. And that is an incredible lie to what is the immense power of the truth of what poetry is actually all about. You know, I'm not really concerned whether or not you like my poetry. I'm concerned that I'm writing and I'm growing as a creative being. This will serve me forever. You won't. You will go. This interview will be over. You know, so I can't be defined as to whether you like me or not. Now, a lot of the time in my career, people will be saying to me, that's really arrogant, Lemn, and it's not, actually. That's the most humble place for me. A person can never say that they are humble, because that's not humble. But what I'm trying to say is that I am, the poem is the queen, and I'm its dresser. And I sit at its throne, by its throne, dressing it and making sure, as best as I can do, that the threads are right. And then I just watch it walk out in front of an audience. I'm like, wow, oh shit, oh God, I missed that bit. This is the development of the artist's critique. This is the heart of what it is to be an artist. Am I looking out at you all and saying, please tell me whether what I've done is good or not? This is really important, because what this means is that in slam poetry, there is quite the possibility that, number one, we have lost an entire generation of poets. And number two, the priorities were always wrong. Now, That's the first point. To set up this idea, what you must do is accuse an ivory tower of keeping you out. Before you build an ivory tower yourself, you must find an ivory tower that you feel you've been kept out of. Now this is tricky because there are gatekeepers and there are people who say you're not allowed in. And they are in poetry just as much as they're in football, just as much as they're in any other department of our blah. But as a poet, you cannot be defined by what you're against. You must be defined by what you're for. And that, for me, that is the creative spirit. To go wherever it wants to. Immediately, what happened with slam poetry, right at the beginning, was particular kinds of poetry would win the slam poetry blow, and particular kinds of poetry wouldn't. Hey, there's your ivory tower, already being built. The foundation is there. So what do you get? You get Tong Fu, you get Bangs at the Gun, you get blah, blah, blah. You get all of these incredible bursts of momentum to make an event happen where there is poetry, but at the same time, it shoots itself in the foot by deciding who is best and who is not via an audience. Now, I know that those places that I mentioned, Banks of the Gun and Tong Fu, actually do great stuff for poetry, for people to get on stage, aside from slam. But my contention is this: they would have been there anyway. What is the first thing a poet does when they've done a slam? Stop doing slams. A slam is there primarily for the organisation that's holding the slam. And a gig should always be there primarily because they want to put on the poets. So this has been a very tricky narrative for me to communicate, because at the same time as slam poetry happening, I'm realising, oh, I'm the older generation now. And this is the younger generation. So when I saw Brian Patton, I said to him, Brian, like, you know, what is happening? Because this thing is happening, and they don't know about the Caribbean poets that came before, that laid the ground, that did, you know, etc., etc. And I realised, and what he said, "Yeah, Lem, they're just cleaning out the rabbit hutch, Lem." And I thought, wow, what a beautiful thing, because what is happening with the slam poetry generation is what happened with the 60s generation. That's what Brian Patton did as the Liverpool Poets in 1967. You know, that's what Michael Horowitz did at the Blarn, and actually they've done throughout their career. You know, they clean up the rabbit hutch. And so I've always felt to take it with a pinch of salt, because I am getting older, and the same thing happens, and that is that whether it's slam poetry, whether it's beat poetry, whether it's jazz poetry, you get these poets of every generation, whether it's punk poetry, Attila the Stockbroker and various other jewels, you get these poets who regardless, just shoot up like fireworks, and then just spread light in the middle of the air, and from that light, new shoots grow. You know, Kate Tempest, you know, Luke Wright, you know, all of them spread light, and that light shines on people who want to do it as well. You don't have to be successful as a poet. Poetry can serve you through your teens, it can serve you through your divorce, it can serve you through your depression. You can get up on stage and at an Apples and Snakes gig as a depressed human being and feel a sense of self, a sense of bridge between one time and another. And that's okay if that's all it did. That's as good as me having a full lifetime career in poetry. That's as good as that. Poetry is that powerful. And I sometimes think that the judging of a poem out of 10 reduces what it is to be a poet or to be creative.